Good morning, this is a Joy of Adventure little instructional film, and we want to talk to you today about the practicalities and the principles of expedition food. So I've got some bits and pieces laid out on the table here, and we're just going to chat about some of the things you need to think about when you're planning your meals and your menu for your expedition. A little bit of time spent at home will be really important, and it will make things run smoothly during the expedition. The other thing to think about as well is that if you practice a little bit of your cooking before you go, you're likely to have a much easier time of it when it's wet and it's wild and it's windy and you're trying to rustle up this cordon bleu menu. So, coming to the principles, the key principle, I would say, is that food you produce needs to be tasty and stuff that you want to eat. We're all different, we all like different things, but make sure that the food that you produce is something that you think you'll actually want to eat. The next thing that's really important is to make sure that the food you produce is actually nutritious, and that's thinking about the calories. So, on the back of pretty much all bits of food these days, packaging, there'll be some description of how many calories and what the protein and carbohydrate. Think about making sure that you have probably more calories than you might normally have. You can be working hard, especially at Easter if it's quite cold, you'll be burning up more calories. And make sure that it's not just sugary sweet things, that actually you've got a good balance of protein, carbs and fats in there. So it needs to be nutritious. I guess another thing we want to think a little bit about is how much it's going to cost. We've laid out a few items here. Generally, stuff that you buy in bulk, a big pack of porridge oats here, will be much cheaper than stuff that's individually packaged. So if you compare the cost of these individual oats so simple, which are basically just oats, it's 10 times as expensive. Okay, now maybe you'll have to do a bit of decanting, use some sandwich bags, make your own little sachets of this, but cost-wise, it's much more cost-effective to buy things in bulk. Same with sort of the rice here. Again, it's probably nearly 4 times as expensive, probably more so actually, because this is slightly hydrated. So, but there are some balances in terms of practicalities. But it's worth thinking about what can you decant down to keep the cost down. Right? Go around the supermarket, have a look at things, make some lists, work out what's the cost-effective way of producing the food you want. The next thing that's really important, and probably I would say this is probably the most important thing, that the food that you produce needs to be practical in an expedition setting. Okay, so a good example here, I've laid out a couple of potential meals here. So here we have a meal, pasta with some vegetables and pasta sauce and some chorizo, and you could have maybe some cheese on it as well, and then pudding could be some rice pudding and stuff like that. There's a lot of packaging, it's quite big, it's quite heavy, you can have a lot of rubbish left over, and you can have to divide things down. Compare this to here, where I've got some chili con carne in a sachet, I've got some grains in a sachet, I've got some instant soup, maybe I've made some cake and I've got some instant custard. Now, we can talk a bit about the packaging side of things in a minute, but these are already the right sort of portion size probably, and they are quite waterproof, they're in sachets, and you're only going to get with a small amount of rubbish at the end. So, some things to think about. So, I would say, are they quick to cook? Is this pasta, quick cook pasta, that's going to cook in 5 minutes or less, or is it going to take 20 minutes to cook? And think about the fuel you're going to use, okay? Is the food robust? I.e., is it going to stand up to being stuffed into barrels and things like that, okay? So soft things like this, they're not too bad. Is the package going to split when you put it in an extra bag? Is it a whole big loaf of bread versus maybe like wraps and things like that? Yeah, so think about, is it going to stand up to being on expedition? Obviously things like tins, super robust, they don't know, they can drop in the bottom of the boat, but they're quite heavy. It wants to be stuff that you can cook in a couple of pots. It doesn't want to be some amazingly complicated things. If the weather's foul, you want to be able to rustle it up quite quickly. And it wants to be something that is easily cleaned up afterwards. Okay, so generally things that are really greasy, lots of oil, frying things means that you have pans that are really difficult to clean, and possibly the environmental impacts of having washing up liquid and stuff at camp. So think about, can I clean it up easily? And then, is the packaging waterproof? Yeah, do I have to have it in my barrel? I don't know, paper packaging, or can it go in my other bags where I'm not too worried about whether it gets wet or not? The other thing I think it is appropriate to think about is what's the environmental impact, yeah, of the packaging and the things that we've got. So we want to try and avoid single-use plastics. Okay, if you go for glass and tins, all of those can be recycled. Okay, rather than perhaps plastic pot noodles and things like that, where you're going to eat one meal and then you've got all this plastic to throw away. There might be a little bit of a balance. Yes, we've got sort of plastic packaging for these sachets, but the actual volume of waste is quite small, and we can throw that away at the end. So it is worth us thinking about those side of things. It could be that we decant things into plastic Tupperwares, which are washable and reusable. Yeah? So it might be, if you're worried about your glass, you could decant that into a plastic Tupperware. It's not going to break, you're not worried about it getting dropped. You can take it home, you've minimised the waste, you've already recycled these before you've left home. And the other thing you want to think about is portion size. How much do I eat? We're all different. Well, I eat more on expedition, possibly, especially if it's cold. So try it out at home, work out what's the right amount for you. Really important that if all that we want is a quarter of the bag of pasta, that we don't take a huge great bag of pasta with us. Okay? So think about what your portion size needs to be, practice a bit at home, and then decant things into appropriate size containers. The way to do that might be to use Ziploc sandwich bags, it might be to use Tupperwares. Quite a lot of things these days come in these snap close bags, so maybe when you've finished your granola you can save some of those bags, and they make great things for putting all sorts of things in, and they're waterproof and quite robust. Okay, so think about portion size. How much do I want to eat? You know, do I eat a whole block of cheese? Or actually, what's the appropriate amount on this block of cheese? The dog comes in the background. And last of all, practice. Practice at home, practice cooking this stuff on your camp stove, in your garden, before you go, so you've worked out what the ins and outs. And if it doesn't work, come up with a different idea. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of an overview of some of the principles of food. And what we're going to do in some of the further videos is look in detail at possible menus for breakfast, lunch, and the rest of it.